Did you know that there are 4 times as many gun shops in the US as there are McDonald's locations? According to National Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF, there are approximately 52,000 federally licensed firearm dealers in the United States, but only 13,000 McDonald's. Why does US need so many gun shops? Do people actually need more guns than burgers and fries? Today, we're diving into a topic that often sparks heated debates. Why does the United States allow guns? With the ongoing discussions around gun control, mass shootings, and the Second Amendment, the question of why guns are so prevalent in American society is both timely and complex. In this video, we're going to explore the history of gun rights in America, the legal framework that supports them, and the statistics that show the impact of guns in the country today. By the end, you'll have a better understanding of the reasons behind the continued legal presence of guns in the US, both from a constitutional perspective and a modern statistical viewpoint. To understand why guns are so entrenched in American society, we have to start with the Second Amendment to the US Constitution. The Second Amendment, ratified in 1791, states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed." But why was this language included? To get to the heart of it, we need to look at America's history during the late 18th century. The Founding Fathers were deeply influenced by the concept of individual liberty, having just fought the Revolutionary War to free themselves from British rule. The Second Amendment reflects their desire to ensure that citizens could defend themselves, both from external threats and potentially a tyrannical government. While the exact interpretation of the Second Amendment has evolved over time, it has remained a cornerstone of American gun rights. Fast forward to the 20th and 21st centuries. The Second Amendment has remained at the center of debates over gun control. But how has it played out in practice? For much of the 19th century, gun ownership was relatively unregulated. However, as urbanization increased and the country industrialized, so did concerns about crime and violence. In the early 1900s, the US began implementing more restrictions on firearm purchases and use. The National Firearms Act of 1934 regulated machine guns and short-barreled shotguns, while the Gun Control Act of 1968 set the stage for modern-day firearm regulation. Yet, despite these laws, gun ownership continued to grow, especially in the second half of the 20th century. So what changed in the legal landscape? Perhaps one of the most significant developments in the 21st century was the Supreme Court's 2008 decision in District of Columbia v. Heller. The case challenged Washington, D.C.'s ban on handguns. In a landmark 5-4 ruling, the court held that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm, unconnected to service in a militia, and that this right extends to common firearms such as handguns. This ruling was a game-changer. The court's interpretation of the Second Amendment essentially invalidated laws that restricted individual gun ownership, particularly in urban areas. Since then, numerous states and local governments have passed laws expanding gun rights and reducing restrictions. But why has gun ownership remained so widespread in American culture? Why does the US have an estimated 393 million guns, more than one per person, despite having a population of around 330 million? Guns are deeply woven into the fabric of American culture. For many, firearms symbolize freedom, self-reliance, and personal protection. The American frontier history, where individuals needed guns for hunting and defense, created a long-standing tradition of firearm ownership. Over time, guns have become a symbol of independence and, in many cases, a rite of passage. In rural areas, hunting and shooting sports are deeply ingrained in local traditions. Guns are seen as tools for recreation and survival, and they're passed down through generations. On the flip side, urban areas often have different views on gun ownership, as the risk of gun violence is more prominent. Now, let's look at some compelling statistics to understand just how widespread gun ownership is in the US. According to the Pew Research Center, about 30% of American adults report owning a gun, and around 42% of households have a gun. The US is the only developed country with a gun ownership rate this high. And when we break it down by state, we see significant variation. For example, Wyoming has the highest rate of gun ownership at 66.8%, while states like New York and California have much lower rates. Now, here's an important point to consider. The US also has one of the highest rates of gun-related deaths among developed countries. In 2021, there were 48,000 gun-related deaths, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. That's nearly 130 deaths per day. Of these, 60% were suicides and about 35% were homicides. Despite this, the American public remains deeply divided on gun control. Polls show that while there is support for measures like universal background checks, many Americans still feel strongly about protecting the right to own firearms. Let's not forget the role of politics and economics in shaping the gun debate. The National Rifle Association, NRA, is a powerful lobbying group that has pushed for policies favoring fewer restrictions on gun ownership. The NRA has spent millions on political campaigns, influencing lawmakers and public opinion on gun rights. On the economic front, the US firearms industry is worth billions of dollars. Companies like Smith & Wesson, Ruger, and Remington are key players in both the domestic and global markets. This economic powerhouse ensures that gun ownership continues to be a viable option for millions of Americans. Politically, there's a deep divide on the issue. On one hand, conservatives emphasize the right to bear arms as a cornerstone of American freedom. On the other hand, many liberals and gun control advocates call for stricter laws to curb gun violence and reduce mass shootings. So where is this all heading? The debate over gun rights and gun control shows no signs of slowing down. Efforts to pass federal laws for things like universal background checks, assault weapon bans, and red flag laws have faced significant opposition, especially in the Senate. However, there's a growing push at the state level to implement stricter gun laws. States like California, New York, and Illinois have some of the most restrictive gun laws, while others, like Texas, have expanded gun rights, including allowing concealed carry without a permit. Public opinion is slowly shifting as well. While the overall support for gun rights remains high, polls show a growing consensus for common-sense gun safety laws. So why does the US allow guns? The answer is a mix of historical, cultural, legal, and political factors. From the Second Amendment to the powerful influence of the NRA, guns are deeply embedded in the fabric of American society. At the same time, the statistics on gun violence and the ongoing debates over gun control show that this is a complex issue without easy answers. Ultimately, the question of whether the US should continue to allow widespread gun ownership is one of the most divisive issues in the country. But one thing is clear, the conversation is far from over, and it's something that continues to evolve as the nation grapples with the balance between individual rights and public safety.